Hello and welcome to another bite-sized learning of Terraform. Today we are going to be talking about Terraform data sources. This is the second type of source that is provided through providers. We talked about resources in the last video, which are things that are part of managed state. And then we talk about data sources in this video, which are things that you want to reference that are either part of other Terraform stacks or completely outside of Terraform altogether, or the result of a function, some kind of function inside of Terraform itself. Not something that needs to be managed state because it's something that can be generated each and every time. You can see on my screen here that I have an example of the local provider's file, local file data lookup. Using the data keyword, I use the local file, and all that this does is render or load up the contents of a local file that's on my file system. It has one single bit of input that is required called file name. It's just a path of the file that will be read. And if the file doesn't exist, the Terraform plane is going to throw an error. It has a bunch of output, but the one that I'm primarily interested in is the content, which is just the raw content of the file. In my case, I have a local file called foo.var that is stored here inside of the project. It has the words "Hello World" written in it, and when I run a Terraform plan, which you can see I already ran once, but I'll run it again, no problem. It will output that file content into an output that I have specified in this example project. You can see the words "Hello World" are rendered right here. Data is super useful. Terraform attempts to render it during the plan phase and not the apply phase whenever it can. The only times that it has to that it'll show that it can't render it during the plan phase is if it depends on some sort of managed resource as input or as content that needs to be computed before it can't get computed content before it gets to the apply stage. An example of this is if I were to, for example, pass in like this random integer. If I were to take this random integer and pass it into this file as a template instead of a file and were to render it, this data lookup wouldn't be able to render it until the apply phase because the random integer is not generated until the apply phase. It will also not render it if there are changes to things that are managed. So after the first time, it'll say, okay, well, I know it's computed now. I can render it because it's not changing. If that integer were to change in a second plan and apply, or being shown to change, it would not, it would say, hey, I have to compute this again. I can't render this until the next apply. So those are the conditions where a data source is not rendered during the plan phase, but generally speaking, it's usually rendered right away. Very useful feature, great for looking up things. It's way better than hard coding. So when you're setting up a project, I always advise that if there's a data source to look up something, do that. Don't hard code the values as variables. You really want to kind of infer as much information about the resource as you can through data lookups where possible. This is really, really important when you start talking about the cloud providers, doing things like looking up VPCs, looking up subnets. Those are all things that you want to do with the data. You kind of provision those usually in a separate stack, and then you'll reference that data in kind of child stacks that populate that Terraform or that AWS account as an example. So that's just some of the ways that we use a data source in Terraform. I really would appreciate it if you enjoyed this video, if you would give me a like and a subscribe, and I will be producing more Terraform content in the very near future. Thank you so much and have a great evening.